Hello, and welcome back to another reading for Bedtime Stories. This is Mr. Tweedy by Anne-Marie Schilling, Chapter 12. The following morning, bright and early, Dave made some innovations in the car. As we were now traveling on the scenic New York thruway in heavy traffic, it was our imperative that no passing motorist spy our Robin in the car, and perhaps turn his attention away from his driving. For this precaution, Dave relocated my crutch above the rear windows, making it fit securely by adjusting the length. Then, to accommodate the ravenous appetite of a robin, he set up a regular self-service cafeteria on the rear window shelf, which was invisible to the outside because of the trailer we were towing. He filled tiny plastic cups with such taste-tingling delicacies as freshly butchered horseflies, thinly sliced mudworms, mangled moths, just to, mention a few, plus water and a lemonade. Then, to accommodate our robin's newly found pleasure in sunbathing, he made a nest out of tiny former doll pillows. Now, about sunbathing, this was the cutest thing I had ever seen. Having found a nice patch of sunshine on the shelf of the back seat, Mr. Tweedy decided to take a sun bath. Perhaps his wing hurt him a bit, even though it didn't seem to impair his flying ability. Anyway, when he found this bit of sun, he ran around in tight little circles, evidently testing the direction of the sun rays. Then he fluffed out his chest, squashing himself down so he looked like a duck, and spread out his injured wing toward the sunlight. Imagine a little bird using the healing rays of the sun like that. No doubt it was only the added warmth he was looking for. Anyway, he was as cute as a button. So now to get back to the car innovations. Kathy, not to be outdone by her younger brother, had an equally tempting array of tidbits on her side of the floor, on the front seat. Her cafeteria, however, boasted a swimming pool, improvised from a flower bowl. And this, believe me, Mr. Tweedy absolutely loved. There is much to be said and much more to be left unsaid about having a bird bath in a car. I guess for that matter, the same holds true for having a robin. To put up with this sort of thing one would either have to be rather simple-minded, which I probably also am, or one who has learned that the greatest riches in life come from a store of wealth or material possessions, but from a store of memories. To gain these riches, quite often one must first give of oneself through self-denial or putting up with inconveniences. Putting up with a bird bath was truly an inconvenience, but it could have been worse. What if we had been a car without a holy floor? At least ours had a perfect drainage system, and it's also a lot of fun to look down at one's feet and watch the miles go by. At least you know that you won't fall far if the floor caves in. Ah, yes, we made happy memories on that trip. Having accomplished the task of preparing the car so our robin would remain out of sight, we headed west. In the beginning, traffic was light and we were light-hearted. Once again, we were singing our way down the open road, this time with a robin splashing away and then chirping away from the brand new perch which he had found, the emergency brake right over my leg. Well, anyway, it was rather refreshing to get my leg bathed when he shook himself dry. The only part that I took objection to was something else. But birds will be birds, and fortunately that part of him was only over my sneaker. As a nurse, believe me, I had to put up with worse. For lunch that day, I decided to prepare a feast a la modern housewife. Boned chicken heated in a can of gravy, mashed potatoes out of a box, peas and cranberry sauce out of cans. The end result was really delicious. I wish I could describe this meal as it really was, not the food itself, but the setting, the atmosphere, the peace and the quiet that comes with the noon of the summer's day, siesta time. Even the birds and the bees had folded their wings and gone to sleep. That is, all except Mr. Tweedy. He was still at the table with us, quietly nibbling bites of Dave's chicken. It was really hot this noon, and all the trailer windows were open to try to catch a little breeze. Parked at the far rear of the service area, there was no sound except that which had come as a truck pulled in behind us. But then what a shock! Trumpeting elephants, right at our window. Let me tell you, there is no noise on earth which can shatter silence and unsuspecting nerves like the blast from an elephant. Of all the unheard of, unthought of sounds, this was the worst. Dave and Kathy screamed, "What's that?" simultaneously. What I was swallowing choked me, and Mr. Tweedy, who had never before let sounds disturb him, flew wildly up to David's bunk. Kathy, the bravest one of us, raced out to find the source of the noise. David put caution ahead of valor. He waited to lend me his assistance. We didn't have very far to look. Parked directly behind our trailer stood a huge trailer truck circus van, complete with two huge, discontented elephants. As we reached the back of our little home, these mammoth beasts trumpeted again. A guard who was watching over them didn't seem all too happy with this chore. Frankly, he looked more than a little bit concerned. One elephant, whose hindquarters were clearly visible, was obviously aggravated with his lot. With all his might, he was pushing his thigh against the restraining outer beams, and these were groaning under the strain. One shove at the right ankle, and there'd be an elephant on the loose. It's funny how children react to things. Kathy, I'm sure, would have liked nothing better than to see that huge elephant break out of the van. David, more keenly aware of what might happen if he did, he had once made friends with a helper on a circus lot, was all for leaving the scene in a haste, to which I agreed quite heartily. It doesn't take long to secure the hatch if you've got an incentive pushing you. Those trumpeting elephants were more than enough incentive for me. I practically threw the dishes into a box on the floor, piled dirty pots on top of them, and in nothing flat we were out of there. Bird baths, elephants, what's next? It didn't take long to get my answer. We had barely gone 10 miles from that service area, and I had barely gotten my heart unstuck from my throat when we were in for another ghastly fight. We were witnesses to what can happen when someone loses control of a car, and believe me, in those few split seconds, my children were shown the reasoning behind my strictest order to keep the robin out of sight. In fact, immediately after the incident, the first spoken words were, "Thank God it wasn't Tweedy's fault," and that it wasn't, for Mr. Tweedy was at my feet. Fortunately, it was noontime, with practically no traffic on this divided highway. What happened was a woman driving for the first time with power steering. Her husband said it would be her last. Passed us on at a rapid clip. Pulled the wheel too hard to get back into my lane. Pulled again too hard to get back. And finally, after crisscrossing, she applied the brakes while her husband grabbed the wheel and brought them to a screeching halt in the gravel beyond the parking lane. The way those children were being tossed like pillows in the back of that station wagon, I thought sure they'd get killed, but fortunately they only got bruises. That afternoon around 4 o'clock, when traffic was heavy and my hip was aching, I pulled off the highway into a picnic area. Mr. Tweedy had been snoozing, but the moment I stopped the car, he woke up. Flitting to the back seat, he began to hop about in anticipation of getting some exercise. I had stopped on the spur of the moment, and now I could see that the place was too small for a butterfly hunt. People were resting or eating at picnic tables, and there were several children scattered about. "I guess we could walk around a bit," Dave said. "All right," said Kathleen, "but let's keep away from the people." I had to smile at her remark. The Pied Piper of Hamelin could not have had as much magnetism as that little robin perched on her arm. First, the children came running. The grown-ups followed, and soon a group formed a circle, holding my children from view. A hush fell, and I heard David say, "Don't scare him now. You'll have your turn." Suddenly, there was a break in the circle, and I caught a glimpse of what was going on. One by one, the people were holding out their hands, and David was telling Mr. Tweedy to go to these strange perches. Unfortunately, the robin did exactly that. From David's hand, he'd hop to whichever palm or finger was next in line. There were some people he refused to go to. Dave told me later, and he seemed to like one man, an elderly gentleman, better than all the others. Later, this man told David that all his life he had loved robins and their songs, but never had expected that one day he might feel the touch of one on his hand. As we pulled away from the picnic area, I took one last look at the scene in my side view mirror. Before Mr. Tweedy arrived, it had been a strictly mind-your-own-business group, each family keeping to itself. Now the people waved and called goodbye, laughing together. The touch of our little robin had, for a moment, warmed their lives. Of course, during the morning hours, I had made good mileage. With the robin having all the luxuries of home and the children completely absorbed in his antics, things had gone beautifully. But now it was late afternoon. The weather had changed. Up in the sky, white mares' tails grew and multiplied, while sudden gusts of wind pummeled the trailer. Combined with the air tug of passing vehicles, this made driving so difficult as to require my undivided attention. The children realized that I needed peace and quiet, so David absorbed himself in a butterfly book, and Kathy wrote notes. As for Mr. Tweedy, Kathy had laid down the law. He was to remain in the back of the car. No bathing and shaking water all over us until things eased up a bit. Whenever he flew to the top of the front seat, en route to his swimming pool, Dave immediately called him back. But Mr. Tweedy soon discovered a new way to the bird bath. While Dave was reading, he didn't see the robin sliding around the edge of the front seat. Kathy, equally engrossed, didn't notice until the splashing began. "Why, you little rascal! You get right out of there," she scolded as she put her finger down to the flower bowl. "Hop out," she ordered, and he did. Mr. Tweedy was now dripping wet, and instead of handing him to Dave through the space between us, Kathy turned her back to me and started to pass him over to the window side. Just then, a freakish gust of wind on my side of the car came. The wind blew in. Our robin blew out. Somehow I managed to slow down the car and the trailer and park on the shoulder of the road before my two screaming children bounded out. Unable to walk without crutches, I could not follow as they raced back along the highway and disappeared around a bend. It was an agonizing wait before Dave came running back, alone. "Where is Kathy?" I demanded. "What has happened?" "She's coming," he answered. "Don't you even care about Mr. Tweedy?" "Of course I did, but my little girl came first." "Well, what about him?" I asked sharply. "Poor little bird," he began in a voice of woe, but there was mischief in his eyes. "Out with it," I said. But all I could reply was, "Gee whiz." For just at that moment, Mr. Tweedy came flying back into the car. Kathy followed him. After that, we let Mr. Tweedy bathe and splash to his heart's content, while the children excitedly told me how they had found him sitting at the edge of the New York Thruway. Why had he waited, we wondered, instead of flying away? Was he stunned or confused by the cars zooming by at close range? Perhaps it was because he had just been scolded and he thought that he was being punished. But Dave, who had believed ever since he found the dying baby bird that God must have wanted him to find it, would have none of this. If God wanted us to have a robin, he reasoned, Mr. Tweedy couldn't possibly fly away. In no mood to argue the point, I drove along without comment. And that's the end of the reading of chapter 12 from Mr. Tweedy. Let's close tonight with a bedtime story. Holy God, thank you for this day. Thank you for everything that has happened today. Guide us and strengthen us and help us to remain peaceful with all around us. Help us to be loving to all around us. And help us to express your love to all the people that we could come across. Help us to have a good night's sleep tonight and help us to wake up feeling refreshed, revived, and ready to take on the day. Show us your love and grace in fresh and new ways, and may we show that to other people going forward. Even at a time when we are stressed, even at a time when we are worried, even when we are at a time when there are so many unknowns, let us not forget the importance of loving all people and showing love to every single person that we meet. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Good night.